Okay, former governor, Virginia, joining us now, Governor Bob McDonnell. Governor, good to have you with us, man.
Hey, John, good morning. Glad you're in D.C., and good to be on the phone with you here from Hampton Roads.
All right, sir. Thanks for joining us. I know you've got a lot going on right now. I want to start, though, with kind of the experience you've had going through the witch hunt and everything that you had to deal with, the federal prosecutors basically having unlimited resources in trying to take your freedom away. If there is one take, Governor, that you had over this whole thing, one or two major takeaways, what is it?
Well, first, it's what really carried me through it, and that having tremendous faith in God and His grace and providence, and also in the justice system. I've been a prosecutor, been a attorney general, and seen the inner workings of it. And our system's not flawless, but it is the best in the world, and usually gets it right, as it did with my case in the United States Supreme Court. But my complete, you go from governor to indicted in 10 days, and you know in your heart that it is a wrongful indictment based on a false narrative. You only have really one choice, and that is to keep your head up and trust in God that things will be well. And John, I had amazing support from people around the country, Democrats and Republicans, who believed that this was wrong. And after 3.5 years, it turned out okay. But it was a battle, and I'm very, very grateful for the people around the state and the country who came to my defense.
Governor, what is the message to other Americans who have been unjustly targeted by the federal government? I mean, when you go back to your case, you look at the fact that they offered you a deal. Remember that? And on paper, the deal didn't look so bad. You resign and you do probation or something and you pay a fine. It all goes away. You rejected that because you were innocent. So you're not going to make a deal when you're innocent. But then it's like when you have to go up against the federal government, right? They have unlimited resources. So, like, I heard that they had dispatched 50 FBI agents to Virginia just digging up stuff in order to go to trial. What's your message to other Americans when you try to do the right thing, but you're faced with this plea bargain and you simply don't have the resources to battle them? What do you do?
It's a very good point on a number of fronts. Most federal charges end up in guilty pleas because people don't have the resources, the stamina, to be able to fight. And of course, many people really are guilty, and so they end up in guilty pleas. Very few go to trial, and the ones that do generally end up in guilty verdicts. And I told them from the very beginning there will never be a plea. We will fight every step of the way, as did my wife, because we knew, and the lawyers knew, that there was absolutely no violation of the law. I did what I did for thousands and thousands of people, which was referring business people. This was the CEO of a publicly traded Virginia company, and referring them to cabinet members or other staff members, or inviting them to events, and that was essentially the allegation. So I'd say that, the interesting part, John, to your point, is Justice Stephen Breyer said during the oral argument. Of course, he's a liberal member of the court, but he said that this is as big a separation of powers problem as I've ever seen, where the Justice Department takes vague federal criminal statutes and uses criminal law as a weapon to essentially punish routine political interaction and discourse between an elected official and a member of the public. And so the opinion was very, very strong on the implications of this case on both business people and donors and people who participate in politics, as well as elected officials. So anyway, John, the upshot is the Supreme Court unanimously got it right, and in very strong terms condemned this novel and unprecedented theory on which the government proceeded. And I think it now will help provide more clarity to people in the public.
We know, Governor, to a lot of people, what the federal government did to you and the way it was done is scary. it's very scary because, you were able to fight it. You were a former governor and you were able to get a fund going. And I'm sure you're still millions of dollars in debt with these lawyers that fought for you. But a lot of other people out there, average Americans, just don't have those kind of resources. And so it's a very scary proposition when the federal government decides to do a witch hunt, which this was. By the way, both myself and State Senator Scott Survell on the air predicted that your Supreme Court exoneration would be 8-0 unanimous. So you want to give a shout out to Scott there.
He was Senator Survell, a Democrat from Northern Virginia, was one of the few very kind people with courage from the other party that from the legislature who signed on to the brief. Nationally, we had multiple former Democrat attorneys general of 46 different states and territories that signed on for a total of 83. Former White House counsel for Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. So we're very fortunate to have people from the other side of the aisle who joined in. But back to your key point. I had every advantage the defendant could have as a former governor. I had access to the best law firms in the country, Holland and Knight Jones Day, who were willing to do the case without asking for money up front. They thought this was wrong. I knew people who knew me well that could come in and be witnesses and character witnesses. But if I'm a poor defendant in an inner city in America, and I'm combating the federal government, you really don't have a chance. There's no match of resources, and so it has opened my eyes quite a bit to the justice system, and maybe some changes that could be made. Certainly we need a restoration of federalism in our country. The Supreme Court spoke about this, in my opinion, about the state has its own code of conduct for discourse and interaction of elected officials with the public, and laws on gifts and loans, and it's comprehensive in every state in the country. And then for the federal government to come riding in with a vague federal statute called the Hobbs Act or the Honest Services Wire Fraud Act that most elected officials have never even heard of, certainly in Virginia, it raises serious federalism concerns. That's right out of our court opinion. So I was very gratified, John, that the Supreme Court saw the case for what it was, and not only that they ruled 8-0, which was a tremendous blessing, but also that the reasons that they gave for striking down these convictions and vacating them was really spot on, both in oral argument and in the opinion.
Well, no question about it. You hung in there and fought it where, a lot of us, like me, thought, just go ahead and take the plea and get out of this thing. But you did the right thing and hopefully made some changes. What was fascinating, getting back to this whole thing and the witch hunt, is that the federal prosecutor handling your case, now get this, after an 8-0 Supreme Court decision, was considering retrying your case. I mean, it's like, what?
Yeah.
If there is any evidence that this became a personal take somebody down witch hunt, was that not the evidence right there?
It was a little curious. It took 2.5 months after the opinion for the Justice Department to realize they really didn't have a case. It was a different decision maker. This was obviously the Obama Holder administration, Justice Department had made the decisions to go forward. Ultimately, as I understood it, the decision maker that to kill the case finally was Sally Yates, who was the Deputy Attorney General of the United States during the tail end of the Obama administration. John, it's hard to tell because there were so many leaks from government and law enforcement officials and to the Washington Post primarily, but other media outlets during that time, planting stories, all to taint the jury pool and then to influence public opinion. I don't really know what was the truth within the Justice Department, if they were really thinking about it or what the process was. But you are correct. 2.5 months after a unanimous, strongly worded opinion that told them that they got the law completely wrong for the jury, which led to the conviction, and that I could have been convicted for lawful conduct, which I was. I'm surprised it took that long, but it's okay. God is amazingly good. During that 3.5 years, I learned a tremendous amount about reliance and trust and divine providence, about what's important in life, about what the priorities should be, about how to live one day at a time. It was suffering teaches you a lot more than success, John. And in a way, I'm glad I went through it and feel like I'm better equipped to do some positive things to help other people in the fourth quarter of my life.
Governor, you get back to the fall of, I guess, 2013 when this thing started going down. In the summer, you talked about the leaks. There was no question somebody in the Justice Department was leaking stories to the Washington Post every week, because remember, you had this constant drip coming down.
Right.
So that's illegal, and which obviously was also, we thought, they were trying to influence the gubernatorial election of 2013 as well, which they did, right? Right. No question, because it's not like there was one leak and they did a story. There was a leak every single week. Something else got leaked that was very negative on what was going on. Did you ever consider, I have a question here from Amy in Fairfax, who says, please ask the governor, did he ever consider suing WAPO or the lawyers who brought the case against you for defamation?
Well, the leaks were so pervasive from the very beginning. The first story came out on Easter Sunday, 2013. Right. I thought that was somewhat interesting, being crucified on Easter Sunday by the Washington Post, as I have reflected. And then it continued for almost 17 months up until the first day of the trial. So it had clearly tainted public opinion. And it wasn't just information from the investigation. There were some items from the grand jury, which was patently illegal. The other information we thought was clearly in violation of the judge's order that says that they are not to talk to the press. Everybody's to stand down. And so we don't know who the leaks were from. Some of them were attributed to, quote, law enforcement sources, some with, quote, people with knowledge of the investigation. Well, of course, all that's the government. But to the caller's point, that's one of the tough parts when you're in the bullseye of the federal government, John. Our total legal bills now are a staggering $27 million is what it costs for 3.5 years to defend me and my wife and my family and my state. And $23 million for me, $4 million for my wife. And John, every child in my family had to have a lawyer. My two son-in-laws, my sister-in-law, almost every member of my cabinet. Everybody had a lawyer up because of the way this investigation was conducted. And so it cost the state, I think, about $700,000 in lawyers for my staff and 27 plus for me and others. So it was a tremendous burden, but there's no remedy. To the caller's point, there's no defamation suit really that you can file. There's virtually no remedy with the state or the federal government. You have to show that under the Hyde Act federal law that the case was brought in bad faith or with reckless knowledge of the truth or something of that matter. I think it's probably a pretty close call that because of this unprecedented theory that they had to know this was not the law. But I'm not optimistic a case like that would prevail. I remember the famous line of Ray Donovan back in the late 80s, the cabinet member for Ronald Reagan, after he had gone through a event like this and was acquitted of charges against him. And he said, what department of the federal government do I go to get my reputation back? Which is kind of the way I feel in a way, John. But, listen, the long run, God does justice, not the FBI, not the Justice Department. And I am going on with life to new things, and the depth of some of the agony I went through has actually made me a better person. So I'm trying to look forward and not back.
Well, look, you've been through a lot. $27 million total legal fees for former Governor Bob McDonnell and his family in defending a suit that got eventually thrown out or overturned, I should say, by the Supreme Court of the United States 8-0, with strongly worded opinions coming back. It's kind of unbelievable. And get back to the scary thing for average Americans that don't have access to being able to raise $27 million. I mean, you really have no choice but to just settle and get out, regardless of whether you're innocent or not. Governor, you've been exonerated. So is your wife. And a lot of people speculating, well, maybe former Governor Bob McDonnell gets in to the 2018 Senate race, runs in a Republican primary, takes on Tim Kaine's kind of wide open right now. Are we going to see a potential McDonnell for Senate run governor in 2018?
I think, John, I've been in public service for 38 years, from Army lieutenant to governor and a bunch of offices in between, prosecutor, legislator, and attorney general. So I've been incredibly blessed. Never thought that an average kid from Fairfax County would end up with Patrick Henry's job, and so I am been plenty happy with what God has done and opened doors for me in public service. And so the answer is no. I mean, I have my plate is full now with a small business, with teaching at Regent Law School, constitutional law, with practicing law, with doing some other business enterprises, and I'm going to write a book. I have had 4 grandchildren in the last 2 years. Our first 4, just a tremendous blessing. So, John, I think my life is taking a little different direction, and I'm going to focus really on 2 things that I think are important to the country, extremely important. One I mentioned to you was, the restoration of federalism. We're broke in America, $20 trillion in debt. We have regulations that 80,000 pages of new regulations in the Federal Register last year, John. It's stifling. We had, 30 years ago it was 3,000. And, we just had that big tax reform proposal made by the secretary yesterday, because the tax code is just out of sight complex for the average American, even the average accountant or lawyer. So I want to focus on restoring federalism and getting power back to the states and the local governments as the founders intended. And then secondly is civility. John, our discourse is coarse, it's toxic, it's full of blame and finger pointing. There's so few results. We have CRs all the time because people can't agree on a budget. And we have lots of problems in our country, and a lot of it goes back to those basic rules of civility George Washington talked about when he was 16 years old. So I think, John, to answer your question, I think my time in official public service has probably ended, but I do feel very passionate about some of these important principles of civility and federalism that were so important to our founders at the dawn of the republic, that I think I can contribute there.
All right, Governor, I want to thank you for your time. And just to be clear on your answer, you have ruled out a potential candidacy for U.S. Senate from Virginia in 2018. Did I get that right?
I think you got that right, John. But I do want to help in other ways, informally. I still love the process and care very much about our country and our state, and I think I can contribute maybe in some other ways. So I'll leave that up to some of your other guests to talk about their candidacy.
There'll be no shortage of candidates, Governor. A couple of them today wanted me to be sure that I asked you.
It's alive, if you have some sort of monopolies or party bosses appointing people, that's not good.
You got that right, and I've got exactly no appointing people, but a couple of the candidates wanted to be sure that I got that question asked. I think they were a little concerned if you got in the race. So there you have it. Governor, final thing before we got to take off. Do you have a candidate for governor for 2017? What do you think?
Yes, I've endorsed Ed Gillespie a number of months ago. Ed was the chairman of my campaign for governor, and he's an incredibly fine person, and I think will make a great leader. He's got state and federal experience. He's a can-do guy. He's a person of faith. He's a nice man. He's got traditional values that guide him to be a servant leader in politics, not just another politician. And I think he's got the right ideas for Virginia. I know he's got a lot of my old staff that is helping him guide this campaign. So I think he is the right leader for this time. Funny, we've had 3 Irish Catholic governors in a row. He could be the 4th, for the first time in history. So,
I think that's ever been done, right?
Democrat and Republican. We've alternated them. But,
Catholic
we've got other good
resurgence.
candidates. Frank Wagner's a good friend. He's a very competent, smart guy, Naval Academy grad, patriot. I like Frank, but I think it's the right time for this moment, and I hope he wins.
I got to ask you this final question from Brian in Virginia Beach, who says, does Governor McDonnell think experiences like this keep people from running for public office?
Well, that's a very good question. I've heard that actually from many who have said that. Why would people want to get in if you're going to be, prosecuted for 3 or 4 years for doing sort of the routine things that, you've done for thousands of people, which is basically setting up meetings and inviting people to events. As the Supreme Court specifically said, it's not a crime. And so I think that is one of my greatest concerns about the upshot of this case, John, is that. I mean, I know a couple people that are in office that said this is one of the factors that had them get out. Looking at this case as sort of this out of control federal government, unlimited power, uncontrollable prosecutors, as Justice Breyer said. Hopefully this case will rein some of that back in. We obviously have a new Justice Department now, but my message to people would be, please don't let these kinds of things dissuade you from public service. We need more and more people that have a servant's heart, that want to be servants leaders, that really care and have empathy for people that have means and people that are poor or in prison. We should be a governor for all people or a servant for all people. I hope everybody listening might be considering public service. This is things happen in our system that aren't perfect. It's not a flawless system. Our founders weren't perfect people, but they had a tremendous idea about how to build a politic. And so be part of the solution. Don't shy away from it, and be willing to serve. I guess that's my concluding message here on what is today, the 1-year anniversary of my Supreme Court case. April 27, 2016 is when they had the oral argument, and we walked out very buoyed that it was going to come in our favor, John. So it's a good day to have me on.
Well, timing is everything, and we did have you on. Hey, it just all worked out. We were kind of thinking about it, but I want to thank you for your time, Governor, and you've always been very, very good to me. I have to say that. And I've said this on the air multiple times. So is your wife. When I first started my radio show, you were very gracious when nobody heard of me, sir, in coming on my show on almost a weekly basis. That obviously gained us listeners and credibility. And Maureen is also very nice to me in every engagement that I had. You let me do my show one time from the mansion when I started out.
Yeah,
I have a long memory, sir, and I appreciate what you did for me and helping me get this network off the ground. Thank you so much.
John, you're a great talent. You're a good person. You have your worldview, your point of view, which I happen to agree with. You're fair to people. You're fair to guests. And I think that's why you gained a listening audience through a lot of hard work. I see you all over the place. I see you in Richmond. You're in Hampton Roads. You're now in D.C. today. You care and understand state and federal issues. And that's what people want. People want solid, good intellectual discourse about the issues of the day, and not just the screaming and the finger pointing that we get sometimes in the newspaper and on the talking heads on TV. I mean, I think there's a real market for the kind of platform that you've got. So with that, John, have a blessed day. I hope you'll be talking about this tax reform package, which is way, way overdue. And today's also the sort of the make or break day for either a new CR or a full budget. And I just hope that this Republican majority can get us back to a regular, predictable cycle of budgets and not this, really nonsense of regular CRs that create immense unpredictability for people and businesses all over this country. It's no way to run a ship, no way to run a government. So I hope you'll talk about all that, and I hope you have a blessed day.
All right, sir. Thanks for being with us, Governor Bob McDonnell. We're going to have you back to talk about federal and state issues.